Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Joanna Ritchie. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. This is our second interview today, and we're super excited to talk to our colleagues at Midwestern University. I'd like to introduce Dr. David McVey and Dr. Charlotte Bloch. Welcome to Dean's Chat.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you for joining us. You know, we're pretty informal here on Dean's Chat, so if it's okay with you, let's go with first names. David, Charlotte, Joe, and Jeff.
Sounds good.
All right, Joe.
Well, thank you both so much for taking time out of your schedules to come and talk with us and our audience. I feel like over the last year since I've been at Midwestern, I have leaned on both of you a lot, on David and also on Charlotte, as we've been working on various projects with the IRB. And as I have a whole new group of students coming in and interested in projects, I thought, as I was talking with Jeff, about it would be really wonderful to kind of talk about the IRB, what this process looks like, as a lot of the audience can be students that are either prospective, so they may be in their undergraduate degree, master's degree students, and then certainly current students and residents that are all interacting with IRBs in various different intervals. So I'd love to kick it off with a little bit about what your individual experiences were in terms of research, how you got to where you are, and then we'll start with just what is the IRB and what are its roles in research. Charlotte, we'll start with you, and then we'll move down
definitely.
the line.
So I got into research more from the statistical analysis and consulting side. So I went through a lot of schooling to become a biostatistician and did a lot of work in biostatistics and really liked consulting with people, not necessarily leading my own research, but working with the researchers on their fields of research. And then I really got interested in statistics education, so learning how to interpret and teach statistics to people that are novice or might not have a lot of experience. How do you appropriately kind of teach concepts at a level that makes sense for the research that they're doing and that's appropriate? And so that's kind of what led me here to Midwestern, and kind of worked with a lot of researchers over the past 4 years here at Midwestern. And yeah, it's really my passion, is being able to make sure that everybody has a knowledge of statistical literacy, so they can read and interpret statistics, and that kind of factors into the IRB. And so I'll let Dave talk about his role at Midwestern and being kind of the administrator for the Institutional Review Board, which is the IRB.
Yeah, my role is the research administrator. So it's my role to make sure that the applications that are coming into the IRB are consistent and complete. That's the main thing here. We track research. We want to know what types of projects researchers are doing. We want to make sure that their applications are well thought out and that they're professional and that they're in accordance with not only federal regulations, but to help present the institution in the best possible light. So it's our job here, and my job, to look at the applications that come in and give them a pre-review before they go along to the IRB for an ethical review.
That's fabulous. And you know, what's interesting is it's one thing for a student or a doc to come up with research and come up with an idea and do a literature review and do a gap analysis, but the daunting, overwhelming aspect of the research oftentimes is exactly what the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs addresses within Midwestern University, and we thank you for that. But every time I read things like research design and methods, supporting data management, leading and conducting data analysis and interpretation of results, that's where our students' eyes gloss over. So we appreciate your willingness to help educate the professors and the students, if you will.
Exactly, and that's really what our office is here for, is that we have help working through that IRB application, but also we're here to help with stuff after that as well. So we have consulting services here in our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs that can assist you with that interpretation, the data analysis, how to kind of even make sure that you're writing stuff appropriately in that IRB application too. So we know that sometimes that can be a little bit daunting, is what is this question actually asking, and how do I appropriately answer and give enough information that makes sense. And so that's where our office comes in with Dave, and then also our biostatistician Chase is also a great resource for that as well.
Yeah, and this, like, I think I actually sent you an email today. This is one of those areas that I think is really wonderful for students to have the opportunity as well to be a part of this process. They will certainly interact with IRB applications and boards when they're residents, but in my experience, which is the only one that I can speak to, it's not quite as helpful as you guys are, which is really valuable. Again, as a student that's going through a learning experience, and as a faculty member going through that experience, having someone that is there as a resource to help troubleshoot the making sure that the concept of your study makes sense, that you can run an appropriate statistical analysis on what you're trying to do, that you have an appropriate sample size, that you have maybe a power analysis if that's necessary. Can you talk about, I'm sure over the years, there are maybe some common areas that faculty and students might not struggle, but need a lot of coaching. So could you talk about maybe some areas that require a little bit of finesse?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the scope of the project. I think a lot of students come in with some great, awesome ideas, but the scope of the project is going to be too much to handle in the amount of time that they have to either complete the project, but also, knowing that they're also a student as well, and they can't dedicate all their time to working on this research project. So I think the faculty and the resources here in our office can kind of help moderate that conversation sometimes, and provide some background of like how many kind of records would you have to look through in order to answer that type of question? Or does that really make sense that you want to look at all these outcomes? Maybe let's look at a couple of outcomes. So I think the scope of the question is usually where I see a lot of kind of combing that needs to be done, kind of calling of information. And I think with that comes with kind of defining what are the outcomes that you're interested in, what is the sample of participants you're interested in looking at, and how is that data going to be collected. I think those are like the top 3 questions that I think really need to be thought out when you're starting a study. And with that, it's how much time is that going to take? So I always say one of the common kind of ways that people can kind of get stuck in these types of projects is the fact that they don't realize how long it takes sometimes to gather the information. And so if you're doing, like you're looking at chart reviews, getting access to that data can take a long time. Or if you have a really complicated study design that requires, you to enroll patients, like how frequently are you going to be seeing those types of patients in the clinics that can, be consented and enrolled in the study. And so thinking through that time aspect, I think, is really important. And then just making sure that as you're thinking through the study, you don't, you don't have to go back into records or go back into articles to collect the data again. So really thinking through the format that you're going to collect the data in, how is that going to be done, and making sure that you're using your time wisely, I also think is really important. And I'll let Dave kind of talk about the IRB aspect of that, but I really do think the IRB application really helps you think through those questions too, so that you don't necessarily start a study without having to address, you know, what are your outcomes, how is the data being collected, and who is your sample. Do you have any common things, Dave, that you would say people struggle with IRB applications?
I think as you hinted to as well, I think the most common mistake is not allotting yourself enough time to get moving on things. I think we generally recommend that researchers obtain IRB approval the semester before their project is set to go forth, if that's possible. The reviewers are, of course, faculty as well, and they have their own students there and their own research and their own things that they're doing. And so if researchers are busy, they need to remember that the reviewers are busy as well. If it's a busy time of year for researchers, it's just busy for the reviewers. So we ask for patience, but I'm really happy the IRB was very able to move reviews through at a reasonable pace. So just giving yourself enough time to get the project mapped out, to submit it for review, but not only that, but also to get have enough time to respond to requests for revisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's another big thing. If they very seldom does an application to the IRB sail through with no request for revisions. Someone's going to have some request for clarification. Something's going to be missing. Something in the consent form needs to be tweaked. Something across forms isn't consistent. Somewhere you say that the story is going to take 20 minutes, but here you say it's going to take 30. Well, which is it? You know, there's something that's going to pop up that you need to fix. And when the IRB sends a request back for revisions, it's in everyone's interest to move as fast as possible to get that resubmitted, to not let the request sit for 3 months and then expect the IRB to have a response in a couple of days. So the time aspect is it's multifaceted. It's getting the application in, but it's also responding to requests. And I would say that the vast majority of time spent from submission to determination, the proposal is with the PI. It's not with the IRB.
I can certainly validate that from my experience. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, that's interesting. I had a question for you. I had a company come to us recently that has a central IRB. They've got 30 sites around the country. And they asked me what their jurisdiction would be on campus, considering that we have our own IRB on campus. Do you deal with that kind of a situation a lot?
Yeah, do you want to take that, Dave?
Oh, the IRB has oversight of human subjects research that takes place on campus here. If we have faculty members or students who are taking part in a study that has to do with their educational outcomes, and it's taking place somewhere else, that IRB, if there is an IRB there, would have dibs on oversight for what's happening there. And so in that situation, if necessary, we would consider a reliance agreement where we would rely on an IRB that's overseeing something that a faculty member or a student from Midwestern is doing at a different place.
That makes sense, because, you know, a lot of those big companies that are doing multi-center trials have a central IRB, and the question seems to come up, you know, how do we all work together? So that makes sense.
Yeah, typically only one IRB has oversight of a project. And if activities are happening at an external institution, some agreements are put into place to rely on another IRB, or also transfer data or materials.
That makes sense. I figured there would be a procedure there, or a operation procedure. So thank you.
And if I could piggyback off of that, if you don't mind, David, talking a little bit too about there are some certain research protocols that don't necessarily need to go through a full IRB application. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of those that don't need an IRB versus those that are exempt, versus there was another category that I have to go back and do all my training in, expedited, I think was the expedited review. Can you talk a little bit about the different columns in there?
Sure. The IRB's task is to oversee human subjects research. Human subjects, and this comes from our IRB's training, so I didn't write this. This comes from them, so I'm citing them here. The human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator Conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction. That's tests, that's studies, that's even questionnaires. A questionnaire is an interaction, even if it's online, and the investigators never actually have physical contact with the people responding. That's an intervention or interaction. So there's intervention or interaction with living individuals, and you're obtaining identifiable private information. And research then is a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So in a nutshell, human subjects research involves getting information that's identifiable from living people through interacting with them, and your intent is to show that your outcomes are generalizable as knowledge. If either of those two conditions, if the subjects aren't human subjects, or if the project doesn't amount to research, the IRB doesn't have to oversee it, but the IRB should make that determination, not the individual researchers. So in that case, there is a form we have called the Request for Determination of Human Subjects Research. And if you think that your project doesn't rise to the level of being either being human subjects research, you can submit this form to the IRB. The IRB chair or vice chair will take a look at it and let you know if further oversight is needed.
Are those typically things like a meta-analysis, case review? Like what are some kind of general, yeah, I know it's hard to make blanket statements, but some general things that might fit into that category?
The general categories we see are, again, case reports or case studies, where a researcher notices something in the course of treatment that is unusual or noteworthy, and they want to write it up after the fact. So before they write it up, they got to submit this determination form to the IRB and say, this is what I want to do. The IRB say, oh, this is a case study. No further oversight is needed. And they'll issue you a letter saying that. So if you want to go ahead and publish that case report, you'll have that letter from the IRB saying it's been looked at, and that will satisfy any publishers or conference organizers. So case reports, in addition, there are quality improvement projects. Say that somebody wants to improve some metric in their office. They want to introduce some new program, some new intake procedure. I like to say maybe in your office you're using blue pens, and now you want to use black pens and see if that works better. Something along those lines. You can describe your project in the determination form to the IRB, and they'll let you know that, hey, this doesn't rise to the level of human subjects research, because you're saying the results are limited to your institution. You're not claiming this to be generalizable at all. In addition to that, there are meta-analyses, literary reviews. If you are involved in analyzing de-identified biospecimens or any publicly available data sets, or studies involving cadavers, things along these things don't involve living humans, or you're not getting private information from living humans.
Thank you.
Thanks. Again, the bottom line is let the IRB decide. Don't decide yourself. The form is really easy to fill out. For about a month, we're still using a paper form, but in the near future, that form is going to be online, and it'll streamline the process and hopefully be super simple in a lot of cases for researchers or investigators to obtain a letter from the IRB about their project.
Excellent.
And going on with that too, it's important too that the student that's working on those types of projects has somebody here at Midwestern that's overseeing that research too. So if a student's going away on clinical rotation and they have a case study, they just need to make sure that there's a faculty member here at Midwestern that's kind of aware of that research and can be involved in kind of signing off on that determination form, which is just to kind of provide some oversight, just to make sure that students aren't off doing research that's not kind of notified and aware of from Midwestern faculty.
That makes sense. You know, every year we have our student-initiated research program, and we give scholarships to the students, and they team up to do the projects. And our faculty has done a great job over the years of saying, you know, this is a little broad for you to do alone. You need to bring in some classmates, get a team together, maybe a student in the class below you to continue on. So we've been so grateful for your help. What advice would you give a student? And I know you've touched on it earlier, don't bite off more than you can chew kind of thing. But if you're a student and if I'm working with Dr. Ritchie or Dr. Jenkins or Dr. Toms one of my faculty at the college. What would be the first thing you would tell a student to get started on a meaningful research project that would require IRB approval?
Yeah, definitely. I would say making sure that you are looking in the literature to kind of see how a study has been done, research has been done that is within the area that you're interested in. So if you're really interested in looking at, certain types of ways that, say, for example, people are kind of fitting point shoes, and whether they're going through a certain process at these ballet schools to fit point shoes, and how, if they're being referred to a podiatrist or not, kind of look in the literature in a variety of different journals to kind of see, has this research been done before? Have somebody kind of sent out a survey? And be able to kind of not necessarily reinvent the wheel all the time. I think sometimes students don't necessarily know that you can piggyback on other people's research that they've done before and, use similar questions, use a similar study design. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of expand the research field by using other research designs and ways that people have kind of studied certain topics. So I think that would be my first kind of point, is to look into that, because that does lead you to have a lot of insight into that research field, into that project area that you're interested in, so that when you kind of work through that IRB application, or you're thinking through, how am I going to take this other research and kind of do my own research project, you have references to be able to kind of cite. And that's also important too, if you're interested in doing any type of study that you're gonna use a power analysis for. So power analysis is a way of kind of figuring out what size sample of patients do I need to determine that there is going to be a significant effect. It's going to be that statistical significant effect that I want to have. And so with a power analysis, you need to be able to provide pilot study data. You need to be able to provide other references in the literature of that same outcome looked at with the same study design. So if you have some kind of treatment and you're going to look at a treatment in a control group on, the decrease of some type of disease or some type of metric that you're measuring, you need to be able to have those references that are going to come from that literature review to then kind of figure out, okay, how many patients do I need to see in my study to actually find a significant difference between this treatment and control.
I love this discussion because we're touching on one of the most important parts of a project. And I don't know if there's a rubric available to find that gap in this research that's been done. But if a student pulls 20 relevant articles on a topic and we put them all together and you say, okay, where's the gap in this research here? Where could we add to the body of knowledge? Is there a kind of a rubric for that, or a method to that? Or is that just something that just comes to you through reading all these different articles?
It's a good question. I think that there's definitely, I don't know off the top of my head if there's a specific rubric, but I have a feeling there's ways that people have kind of tried to quantify that type of gap analysis. So I feel like there's
like the XY chart. And
there's a way that people have kind of seen, okay, you're going to fill out this type of spreadsheet to try to, kind of think through what is missing and how does my research question fit in.
Right. I mean, that was a stream of consciousness thought, but that is one of the biggest challenges. And it's a big challenge for the professors to help guide the students. And it's not an easy task by any means, if you've got a big body of literature.
And maybe I have a piggyback question on that, because we literally were just doing this with a group of students in terms of kind of a brainstorming session. They'll come, they want to get involved with research. They're not quite sure where to go. They have a little area of interest here. Someone has a question here. In terms of recruiting your help, either from the IRB standpoint or from the biostats standpoint, when is the best time to get you involved? Obviously, we have to have a refined question. We don't want to sit there and waste your time in terms of, we don't even know what we want to do. But once they start to really narrow down a question, what would be your ideal time that we bring you in to ask you those like, where do we
As
not
soon
make
as
it
possible.
too late? Soon as possible? Okay. Because
Yeah.
we never want to waste your time, but
No, as long as there's like you're in the process of like filling out the IRB application, I would say, and you're thinking through the study design, nothing is really, set in stone. You're still, but you have a research question and you kind of know how you're going to approach the problem, or at least have an idea potentially of how you're going to answer that question. Then it's the right time to kind of talk to the statistician or the biostatistician, because we can provide some kind of advice on that data collection part, to make sure that the data you're collecting is going to be able to answer that question. And that's the biggest part that we don't like to see students or faculty members go through, is that they've done all this work, spent all this time, and then they're not actually able to answer the question, the research question they're asking, because the data wasn't collected in exactly the right way that it needs to be, or maybe the outcome should have been recorded in a slightly different way and you collected it, rather than, say like age is like a continuous number, like 18, you collected it in like an age range. The way that we work with that data is going to be different depending on how you're collecting it. And so that then leads to the fact that we can only sometimes do specific statistical analyses with certain types of data. So we can calculate a mean with, age as like this continuous variable, 0 to 100, but we can only calculate percentages if you collect age as a range, like, 0 to 12, 13 to 18. So that then impacts, how we can actually answer that question in the end, is kind of based on how that data is collected. So that's, I think, the most important part sometimes with meeting with a statistician, is making sure I'm thinking about collecting data in this way. Like, is this going to be able to answer the question that I'm interested in?
So in other words, Joe, you need to have Charlotte and Dave on speed dial.
I kind of do.
Okay.
They're going to get very tired of seeing my name, but.
So can I shift gears for a second? I'm not sure if you are fully involved in this area, but whenever the university docs are doing research, there's a potential to have some intellectual property questions. Do you deal with that also?
Yes, we do. So within our office is also intellectual property and contracts. So if you have any questions about any kind of intellectual property, IP, any kind of contract agreement. So if there's any data that's being passed from one institution to another, being shared, if there's any like samples that are, being collected that have to go out for analysis at another location, like a lab or something, that all of those types of agreements and contracts have to go through our office. And if there's any contracts that are being with clinical research that's being done at any kind of clinical site, so any of our patient clinics here at Midwestern, that we also have our clinical research services office that works closely with our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs to make sure that any kind of contracts are looked at, and also applications are going through appropriately for working with patients here in the clinic.
That makes sense. I was asking about intellectual property because, either intellectual property is slightly ahead of clinical research, or clinical research is slightly ahead of intellectual property, but they never get too far apart on new ideas. And I just didn't know if Midwestern had like a standard agreement that they do with their professors, because one of our faculty said, "Hey, I got this great idea. Where do I take it?" And I said, "Well, as a faculty member, ORSP is a place to start, but I don't know that we've made any progress or even inquired yet." But your thoughts on that?
Gotcha. Yeah. No, we definitely have. Our team here on both campuses is familiar with general IP contracts and kind of can talk through that process too.
So sorry, Joe, I'm dominating this conversation for a
good.
minute. So do we as a university, apply for provisional patents first, and that gives us a placeholder for a year till we can improve upon it, and then do a non-provisional? Is that our standard methodology?
So that would be a question that you would have to talk to this campus, Sherry and Chris on the other campus, and they kind of work together to be able to do this. So I wouldn't be able to answer that question specifically, but I believe they have had IP kind of contracts for some other faculty, and so there is a process that they go through, and I think they like to be involved, because as faculty members we also have to make sure that stuff is appropriate of stuff being developed here at the university, and then what does that process look like with getting patents and everything. So definitely somebody to kind of send to our office so we can make sure that all the documents and the appropriate process is taken.
Yeah, I imagine there's got to be some guardrails there, because an inventor's like, "Yeah, let's go for it," and they start putting, you can rack up a big fee going after patents if you're not careful and vet them appropriately, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry, Joe, I hijacked the discussion to IP.
No, it's good. It's a multifaceted approach.
There you go. Other thoughts, Joe, on the research with the students?
So I'm gonna throw the ball back over to David. When we start talking about things like IRB approval committee processes from a student perspective, what does that actually mean, and why is that necessary to go through something like that?
It's necessary to go through that because the IRB ensures that research that involves human subjects is ethical, and also that it maximizes benefits not only to the subjects but to populations at large, and seeks to minimize risk. And I failed to expand on your question about the levels of approval, and I can do that right now. But what'll happen is students working with the faculty member as the PI can map out their project, their proposal, submit it in. Or the ORSP office can look through and make sure that no other documentation is needed, like reliance agreements, like permission from external sites to use their facilities to conduct your research. So if you're going to give us a survey or presentation at a local library, you got to get permission from that library to do it there. So we'll go through your application and let you know if you need additional items like that. We can let you know what level of consent form you might need. Subjects should be given informed consent. We have templates that we can provide and let you know how that works. The IRB then, after the ORSP office feels that the application is fairly consistent, fairly complete, sends it on to the IRB, and the IRB will look and determine the level of approval. You mentioned there's this exempt level, and the word exempt can be used two ways here. When the IRB determines that your project doesn't require any further oversight, some people call that an exemption, but it's basically just determining that your project is not human subjects research. When the IRB is actually reviewing your project and they're reviewing your full protocol, an exemption just means that your project is exempt from certain federal regulations. Things like keeping a paper record of signed informed consent. There are certain things that are regulatorily required that can be waived if there's an exemption. And this is done for studies that are determined to have minimal risk. So the risk that the subjects would have in your study isn't any greater than they would encounter in everyday life, basically. The next level up is expedited. And the expedited level means that all regulatory requirements are required to be in place. It's just that the full board of the IRB doesn't need to review the project. So there are currently, I think, 13 members on the IRB, and they meet every month. And when the applications come in, the chair and vice chair initially review them. If they need another set of eyes on them, they can farm them out to a committee called a designated member review committee, who can look at the project. And anybody has the opportunity to say, hey, I think this needs to go to the full board because there's something about this that strikes me as being greater than minimal risk. And there are some categories as well when there are certain vulnerable populations who are proposed as subjects where the proposal needs to be reviewed by the full board. If the full board reviews the project has to wait until the IRB convenes at its next meeting, and they can take a look at it. So those are the 3 different levels of approval when a project goes before the IRB. So the IRB hasn't said, hey, we don't need to look at this anymore. The IRB is saying, hey, we actually have oversight. We have, this is under our purview. We need to look at it. It can be exempt, it can be expedited, or it can be full board, depending on the level of risk.
Thank you.
Very good.
Those were my big questions.
That's great. So more than anything, I just wanted to do a podcast so that we could introduce the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs to our students, so that they can start thinking about what's required if they're going to get involved in research, not just today as a student, but in the future as a clinician. And so Joe and I greatly appreciate your willingness to take time and discuss all of this with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback that because, as we know that these students are going to be going out into their residency programs, sometimes to your point of like, what's a realistic thing you can get done while you're here as a student? And even in this little window that they will have realistic time to work on a project, because once they're in their 4th year, that time interval to apply to something like this, it really starts to disappear because they're using it in their rotations and externships. But sometimes what we can kind of help set them up for, because residency is another time squeeze that they want to do something and they want to do something with impact, but they don't know where to start. And so by the time you get your sea legs, you're halfway through your residency program. Now you have even smaller chunk to try to get some of these things done. So if we can help them start refining questions in their 2nd and 3rd year as a student, they may not be able to do a case controlled retrospective type review, or, certainly nothing prospective in that regard, but helping them start to narrow where their interest or their question or their curiosity is, so that by the time they get to a residency program, they can come with a skill set that better prepares them to jump right in from maybe month 2 or 3. That gives them such a leg up in terms of what they can accomplish then during that residency program, which is where most people will be publishing. So we really appreciate your time and expertise that you shared with us today. So thank you both so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Let me ask you one other question. What are some characteristics that you see in prolific researchers? I ask that because Joe and I interviewed Dr. Larry Lavery, who's going to the University of Texas, San Antonio, and he had an H index of 108.
Oh, wow.
I mean, when Nobel Prize winners have H indexes in the 70s and stuff, I thought, oh my God, this guy's amazing. But he's prolific. Research is his world. Do you see that in certain faculty?
Yeah, I think we see researchers that are very prolific is they're constantly thinking about different ways to kind of approach certain problems. And another thing I think too that's very important with prolific researchers is collaboration. So rarely do you see researchers that are by themselves doing a huge research program and doing tons of publications. Like there's a reason that you have multiple authors on research publications. And it's because they're networking, they're, going to conferences, listening to other talks, making connections with people, using their network from their, podiatry program to then connect with other people in other ways, like the important thing is the kind of class of students you're going through, like those are going to be the people that you can contact when you're out within your research world trying to make a project. You can contact, your friend from your podiatry college, 5 years ago to say, hey, would you like to work on a research project with me? So like keeping those connections and making sure you kind of collaborate and you develop those skills of collaboration as a student in terms of working together on a problem, figuring out, hey, you do really good on, maybe doing a literature review and I really like the data collection side. Like, let's kind of share this burden and work together on this type of project, I think is a really, I think, powerful way that the good researchers can kind of, become prolific and develop their research program.
And there's so much energy and synergy when you start to get in a room with people that are inquisitive, and it's just fascinating to me. But you're right, and today it's so easy. You can get on LinkedIn, you can get on Facebook, you can text anybody you want and they'll answer. And I think it's also important to mention to students that mentors are there just waiting to help you. I mean, if you've got a good idea, email them, text them, call them, and they'll dive right in. And then if that's the case, then David and Charlotte will be working together 10 times more than we already are.
Exactly. Which is, we love it. That's the main part of our office, is to support the research here at Midwestern.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, we won't keep you any longer. We want to thank you for joining us, and hopefully we can do this again down the road. Joe, do you have any last words? Oh yeah. We're going to send you some cups. We've got Dean's Chat coffee cups.
Our swag.
David and Charlotte, and then they're kind of like that fireside chat vibe kind of thing, so that when you're at work early in the morning and nobody else is around, you kind of feel like you're where you're supposed to be. That's good.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And to all of our listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, of course, we'd love a 5-star rating, but Joe and I have been talking about this, and we think we'd like you to jump on and give a comment about Dean's Chat. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, we always appreciate you becoming a subscriber. And until next week, cheers, everybody.